Jeffrey Dahmer sat in a Milwaukee courtroom not as a defendant but as a performer. He had already confessed to the unthinkable. Now he had one goal left, to convince 12 jurors that he was a victim of his own mind. If he succeeded, he would spend his life in a comfortable hospital. If he failed, he would face the fury of the general prison population. This is the psychological breakdown of the trial that proved Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't mad. He was a master of control.
Tell you how this case is going to proceed before I get into some of the other details. I anticipate and I know that the judge is going to give you some general idea as to what Mr. Dahmer pled guilty to, the 15 counts. You see, there were 17 homicides, but 15 charged. The evidence is going to show that the first homicide took place in a place called Bath, Ohio in the year 1978. That the second homicide took place in Milwaukee, but because of the nature of the homicide, it was not a charged homicide, but it's going to be discussed. It's going to be discussed, everything's going to be discussed, but that certainly is going to be discussed. The rest of the homicides that took place in Milwaukee County. You will be made known about every aspect of it. And the person that's going to speak to you about every aspect of it is Jeffrey Dahmer. But he is going to speak to you through the members of the Milwaukee Police Department, the first of whom I'm going to summon as my very first witness. And that is the detective and or detectives, depending upon how they want to split up the testimony, who are going to read a very, very, very long confession to you. And this confession is going to have details that will cause you to be uncomfortable, but I'm sure that you will listen to the words for the purposes that you must know all of this information. Because subsequent to this confession, Jeffrey Dahmer talked to a lot of other people. He talked to a whole bevy of psychiatrists and psychologists and others. And the reason he did that was because every citizen in this country has an absolute right to have it investigated as to whether or not when they did any act, that they were of sound mind. And I'm going to use these phrases, sanity, with the clear-cut understanding, as Mr. McCann brought to your attention, and as I have brought to your attention, that the legal definition for the purposes of the criminal justice system of insanity is the one I have just told you, as the one I'm confident Mr. McCann will remind you of, and as the judge will instruct you. So if I use the word sane or insane, if I use the word kooky, crazy, all those words are being used to portray a state of mind. And I submit to you that the testimony that the doctors will bring to your attention, all the doctors, will give to you a very sound, deep basis for you making the ultimate decision.
Look at the posture. Clinical psychologists call this the mask of sanity. By appearing hollow and catatonic, Dahmer invites the audience to fill that void with the illness his defense is selling. He wants you to believe he is gone, but look closer. Watch his hands. Every time a piece of evidence is presented, he checks his notes. He isn't gone. He is the most attentive person in the room. This isn't the behavior of a man lost in a fantasy. It's the behavior of a man managing his legal defense. The performance has begun.
I am going to call into this courtroom 3 doctors, 2 psychiatrists and 1 psychologist.
The defense's primary weapon was Dr. Fred Berlin. His job was to perform a psychological rebrand, transforming serial murder into a biological addiction. Watch how he avoids the victims and the blood. He starts with the clinical shield, using medical terms to describe Dahmer's necrophilia as a cancer of the mind. He is priming the jury to believe that Dahmer was a passenger in his own body, driven by an engine he couldn't stop.
Or the changes on things relating to sexual disorders as contained in that book?
Yes, sir.
Now, I have indicated to Mr. McCann that I would like you to open the book up to committees that served on various aspects of mental health and look to the area of the subcommittees on paraphilia. Do you have it in front of you?
Yes, sir.
Does that reflect that you were a member of a subcommittee on paraphilia?
Yes, sir, it does.
Does it indicate that another doctor by the name of Judith Becker is likewise on that committee?
Yes, sir, it does.
Does it likewise indicate that a gentleman by the name of Park Dietz, a doctor of psychiatry, was also on that committee?
Yes, Park Dietz is also a member of that committee.
There are about 9 of you that were on that committee.
There's exactly 9 of us listed, if I'm counting this correctly, on that committee.
Tell us what paraphilia is and what was the work of the subcommittee in which you were on in reference to whatever came about as a result of that DSM-3R.
Okay. Well, paraphilia in layman's terms really refers to sexual deviation. The reason we didn't want to use the term sexual deviation is that it's sometimes used as a pejorative. It's used to call people names, that darn deviant sort of thing. And in psychiatry, we're not trying to call people names. We're trying to use shorthand to define that there's a particular problem that we're trying to address. So we use that big jargon, but it's really talking about people who experience unusual or different kinds of sexual desires than the rest of us. I think you asked how I became a member of the committee and what it's all about.
Yes.
Is that the question? This is really the book that helps to define for the psychiatric profession the nature of the various disorders. It's really part of a bigger kind of project that exists throughout medicine. There's what's called, for example, the ICD-9, the International Classification of Diseases, which would not only list psychiatric diseases, many of these, if not all of them, are in there, but would list the various medical conditions also. And the way the process works is that if a person is considered to be an...
Notice the language. Berlin is using words like drive and involuntary. He wants the jury to think Dahmer was starving for these acts. But there is a massive logical hole in this theory. A person who is truly starving will steal food in front of a crowd. They can't wait. Now watch as Berlin tries to explain why Dahmer did wait and how he tries to twist planning into part of the sickness.
Which talks about sexual dysfunctions, and that really refers to people who are having difficulties functioning sexually in intimate aspects of relationships, the people who in making love, for example, aren't able to consummate the sexual act, so people who are struggling in that way. The disorders, though, really represent situations where someone is experiencing something very different in their mind from the rest of us as far as sexual arousal is concerned.
Such as pedophilia.
Such as pedophilia, such as exhibitionism, such as necrophilia.
Necrophilia is what?
Necrophilia, and I know because we talked ahead of time, of course, that we'll go into more detail, but to just give it simply here, necrophilia involves a situation where if a person is having thoughts and about dead bodies, that causes them to become sexually aroused. Well, the last thing that most of us are going to become when we think about dead bodies is sexually aroused. We become disgusted and all sorts of feelings other than erotic feelings. So clearly, an individual who's aroused by these kinds of thoughts, and as I said, I'll go into greater detail later, is experiencing something very abnormal, and it therefore is one of the sorts of paraphilias that we talk about.
Now, that is also known as the Bible for psychiatrists?
Well, in quotes. I don't mean, that could sound to some sacrilegious, and it isn't meant to be that way. But people just talk about...
Berlin is selling a biological prison, but forensic logic provides a simple litmus test: the policeman at the elbow. If a man truly cannot resist an impulse, he will commit the act even if a police officer is standing right next to him. But Jeffrey Dahmer was a surgical predator. He didn't kill when his grandmother was in the kitchen. He didn't kill when he was at work. He only succumbed when the risk of capture was zero. This isn't a loss of control, it's calculated risk management. He didn't lack the ability to stop. He simply chose the moments when he didn't have to. Legal insanity requires a total lack of capacity to recognize right from wrong. If Jeffrey Dahmer was truly lost in a psychosis, he would have been indifferent to the world around him. But the residents of the Oxford apartments tell a different story. They describe a man who is acutely aware of the social cost of his actions. We're about to hear from Sopa Princewell, a neighbor who lived just down the hall. Watch for the moment the symptoms of Dahmer's crimes become public and how he instantly shifts into a master of damage control.
He lived in the apartment building that you were the manager of, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, was Mr. Dahmer committed to a lease in this building?
Yes, I remember he was in the building before I got employed there. Mm-hmm. And at the end of his first year, he renewed his lease with me.
Okay. And does that lease last for a year?
Yes, the lease runs for 1 year.
Okay. And it's renewable on May of each year?
Yes.
Okay. When you first started your job, when did you first start working in the Oxford Apartments?
I remember I was hired to be manager at the building in July 10 of 1990.
Okay. And do you recall your first contact with Mr. Dahmer after you were hired to be manager of the building?
Yes, I believe the first contact I had with him was sometime in July, towards the end of the July.
In 1990?
In 1990, when he asked me to put a lock on his mailbox.
And did you do that?
Yes, I did.
Do you remember anything else about that contact?
I believe he was very grateful that I put a lock for him.
Did you have any contact with him in August of that year?
Yes, in August of 1990, we had complaints from residents about the smell that's going through the building.
Did you talk to Mr. Dahmer about that?
Yes, I did. I called him to my office and discussed with him. And he told me that he was sorry that it happened, but his freezer broke, and he had about $150 worth of meat getting spoiled.
When you talked with him, did he appear nervous or uncomfortable?
Well, while we were speaking, he did not appear abnormal. He was quite normal.
Did you then go up to his apartment to look in that freezer?
Yes, I decided to verify that it was the freezer.
And did you go up to his apartment then?
That's right.
What apartment number was that?
It's the apartment number 213.
And when you went into that apartment, did you notice a bad smell?
I didn't notice any bad smell when I got into the apartment, but because he said it was his deep freezer that broke, he opened it for me, and then I took a look into it.
And what did you see when you looked into it?
Stop and think about that. A person in a true psychotic break doesn't perceive a rotting corpse as a problem. To them, reality is fractured. But Dahmer knew that the smell was a clock ticking toward his discovery. He didn't just ignore it. He began a campaign of social camouflage. Watch how he responds when he is finally cornered by his neighbors. He doesn't act confused. He acts like a man with a perfectly logical excuse.
I saw normal grocery kind of meat on
like
top.
Like chicken?
I believe it looked like steak.
And was it wrapped in a store wrapper?
That's right.
Did he explain why he hadn't cleaned out this freezer when the meat went bad?
Well, he complained about working too hard in the night and that he gets tired.
Did you offer to do anything at that point?
Yes, I was very concerned about the smell, and I offered to help him clean it.
And did you do that?
No.
What happened?
He told me not to worry about it. He will take care of it.
And did he take care of that?
I believe he did, because the smell actually subsided after that.
In your building, does the management regularly bring in exterminators or pest control?
Yes, we have regular spraying of apartments against pests.
Can you estimate how frequently you'll have pest control come in and spray the apartments in a given year?
Normally we call in the exterminator once in a month. And the building has 4 sections of about 12 apartments each. And he comes to spray one section every month. And then we rotate.
So would that be about 3 times a year it would hit each apartment?
Yeah, likely, very likely, 3 times.
Did they ever go into Mr. Dahmer's apartment?
No.
Why not?
Well, normally when it's time for the pest control guy to come in, I usually send a notice to every apartment that would be sprayed. And I remember once when I was in the section where apartment 213 was, Jeff didn't accept the service. He told me that he will be using borax acid.
Did that seem like a reasonable explanation to you?
Well, it was in the point of the operating costs for the business. You know, there is a charge to every apartment that's sprayed, and so if he doesn't want it, then we are going to save some money. So I thought that was reasonable.
Was there ever any complaint about pests coming out of Mr. Dahmer's apartment, that he wasn't taking care of it?
No.
Okay. In your time as manager, did any other tenant reject bringing in pest control into their apartment?
Not that I can remember.
While you were a manager, you suggested earlier that there came a time when Jeff Dahmer was given the opportunity to renew his lease.
Yes.
About when did that take place?
Well, his lease was going to run 1 year from the time he got into the apartment. And our company usually send out lease renewal papers 2 months ahead.
And
so it should be around March.
And was the company at that time willing to renew his lease?
Yes.
And was Mr. Dahmer willing to renew his lease at that time?
Yes, I took the papers to him, and at the first time I went, I didn't get him, so I tried to locate him, and he came to the office and signed his renewal.
This is what we call the rationalization phase. In this moment, Jeffrey Dahmer is perfectly sane. He understands that his hobbies are illegal. He understands that his neighbors are a direct threat to his freedom. And he utilizes a high-level social lie to neutralize that threat. Notice his demeanor as described by the witness. He didn't scream, he didn't act delusional, and he didn't panic. Instead, he gave a logical, socially acceptable reason for a biological odor. This proves he wasn't living in a fantasy. He was protecting his reality. If he truly didn't know his actions were wrong, he wouldn't have spent so much energy pretending it was just spoiled meat. The most famous glitch in the history of the Milwaukee Police Department is often discussed as a failure of law enforcement. But in a forensic sense, it is actually the most damning evidence of Jeffrey Dahmer's sanity. If Dahmer was truly out of control, a face-to-face encounter with 3 armed police officers should have triggered a breakdown. Instead, it triggered a masterclass in deception. We are about to hear from Officer John Bulcherzak. Pay close attention to how Dahmer reacts the moment the law enters his apartment.
That's correct. And the alley that runs north and south parallels North 25th Street and North 24th Street.
That's
Would that
correct.
be true? So when you first saw the two individuals, they were standing in the east-west alley just a little bit east of North 25th Street.
That's correct, approximately halfway between North 25th and the north-south alley.
All right. Did you pull your squad into the east-west alley?
Yes,
And were your lights on in the squad car?
in reference to,
Were the lights on, your headlights on in the squad car?
yes, the headlights were.
What hour was it, to your best recollection, that you pulled into that alley with your headlights on?
It would have been approximately 2:06 in the morning.
AM?
That's correct.
And what did you do after pulling into that alley? Your headlights illuminated these two men down the alley, is that correct?
To an extent, yes.
All right. What did you see, even as you pulled in with your headlights on? Can you tell the jury what you saw about these two men?
Observed the two individuals. One individual was naked, and the second individual appeared to be assisting him to his feet and beginning to walk as we were pulling into the alley.
It appeared to you that he was helping up the naked man off the ground?
It appeared that he was helping him to his feet, and had just concluded helping him to his feet and began to walk.
What did you do then?
At that point, we stopped our squad, or I should say I stopped the squad. Both myself and my partner exited the squad. Both individuals had stopped walking and turned back to see what had pulled into the alley.
Was your red light on? Any red lights on in the car?
I don't recall if they were operating or not. I don't believe they were, but I'm not
But
fully.
it's a City of Milwaukee marked police squad, is that true?
That's correct.
And there's a bank of red and blue lights on the top of it.
That's correct.
So anyone looking back, if they could see through the headlights, would recognize that that's a squad car pulling in.
Yes, they should.
And you and your partner, Joe Gabrish, got out of the squad car. What did you do then?
At that point, we proceeded toward the two individuals. It was apparent to us that this was what our assignment, what the assignment that we had gotten sent to.
You were satisfied that this naked man you saw in your headlights was the same naked man that had triggered the dispatch. You were satisfied you had arrived at whatever it was that caused the dispatch.
That's correct.
All right. What did you do then when you walked up the alley approaching these two men?
As we approached both individuals, we separated both individuals, as is a standard procedure to determine what is happening, what is occurring in the alley.
You separate them both and then separately question them. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Did you undertake to question one of the two men?
Yes.
And which of the two men did you, the clothed or the unclothed man, did you undertake to question?
During our investigation, I questioned the clothed male.
And who was that man? What did you first ask? What did you ask him?
I believe I started out by asking him what's occurring.
What did he say?
At that point, he related that he was helping his roommate.
And what further was said or asked or said by you or him?
During the course of our investigation in the street, we obtained some information regarding identities of the two. And
Did you ask him what his name was?
yes,
The man to whom you were talking, what name did he give you?
he gave me Jeffrey Dahmer.
And did you ask his date of birth?
Yes,
Is that standard questioning procedure when you're investigating an incident?
yes,
Get the name and address?
yes, it is.
And did he produce any type of identification at your request, or did he voluntarily produce identification?
Stop for a second. At this point, most people in a psychotic break would panic or become combative. But Jeffrey Dahmer does something much more sophisticated. He recognizes the social dynamic. He sees that the officers are confused, and he decides to give them a story they want to believe. This is the switch. Watch how he uses language to shift the officer's perspective from crime scene to domestic dispute.
During the course of my investigation, he produced a picture work identification card.
Do you remember when that was? Was that in the alley, or was that at some later point?
No, that was while we were still investigating in the alley.
And do you recall what that identification card was? Did it indicate his employment at a local West Side chocolate factory?
Yes, it was an employee picture ID card.
And from looking at that card, the name, was there a date of birth, if you recollect, on that card?
There may have been a date of birth on the card.
After looking at that card, examining the picture, looking at his face, getting his name and date of birth, were you satisfied that the man was using the right name and speaking his name and speaking with you?
Yes.
And that name was what?
Jeffrey Dahmer.
All right. Do you see that man in court right now?
Yes, I do.
And would you stipulate? Let the record reflect that there's stipulation that's the defendant. What, if anything, did he say about the incident when you queried him on what's happening here?
He related to myself that he was assisting his roommate for the past few weeks back to their apartment. He stated that his roommate had been drinking and had passed out on the couch of the apartment, and that's where he had left him when he had gone to a local tavern to obtain some beer or cigarettes.
So Dahmer told you that this was his roommate, this naked man, that he had left his roommate earlier. The roommate had passed out in their apartment, and he, Dahmer, had left the apartment with the man passed out and had gone to a tavern.
That's correct.
What else did he tell you then?
He stated that upon returning from the tavern, he observed his roommate on the street naked and was trying to assist him back to the apartment.
And what, if anything, did you then do or say or observe at that point after he had told you this?
In regards to?
Any observations you made of him, anything you said or did at that point? He had now basically relayed to you what had brought him there and the circumstances of the incident. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What, if anything, did you do at that point or say or observe?
I was making observations of my entire time since my arrival at the assignment. And
what observations had you made of Mr. Dahmer?
He appeared to be a calm, neatly dressed, clean-shaven, neatly combed hair, clean clothing, no injuries of any sort, clothing, no disarray of his clothing at all.
You were checking that to see if, in fact, there had been an altercation of some type? Is that what you were basically making those close observations for?
Yes, that would be. The assignment we had gotten sent to was a man beaten, and that you run through numerous items that through your mind, that you make observations and check during the course of your investigation.
Right, because the dispatch had said man beaten, you wanted to know if he had been in a fight with this man, the naked man. Is that basically what you were interested in?
Correct, to see if, in fact, an altercation did occur.
How did he answer to you? Was he hesitant or responsive? In what fashion did he respond to your questions?
He responded, no hesitation in any type of response to any of my questions. I responded in a calm, clear voice. I myself am a stutterer of sorts, and I make observations of that if there is discrepancies and so forth of individuals. There was nothing to suggest that he was not as he was presenting himself to be.
What information, if any, did he give you about the naked man, other than saying he was a roommate?
Stated that the naked male was his roommate the past 3 weeks, and he provided a name and an age.
What name did he provide?
I believe the name he provided was John Hmong.
H-M-O-N-G, it sounds like?
I believe.
All right. And what if any date of age did he give you for that young man's birth?
He provided the age of 19 to 20.
Had you made any observations as to the descent of the young man, the naked man in the alley?
Yes.
And what observations had you made?
He appeared to be an Asian male of approximately that age.
Did the name John Hamong, H-M-O-N-G, appear to you or occur to you to be a name that might be of Oriental nature?
Yes, didn't strike me as being unusual of any sort at all.
What happened then, or what was said then, or what did you do then?
We continued to investigate in the alley. I ran through the...
Note the language Jeffrey Dahmer used with the officers. He didn't just lie. He utilized high-order manipulation. He recognized the social biases of the time and framed the victim as a drunk lover. A man in a psychotic break cannot manipulate authority figures with that level of precision and calm. He stayed in character, he was articulate, and he was persuasive enough to make the police walk away. Jeffrey Dahmer didn't just survive this encounter. He managed the police like a chess player, and won. This wasn't the behavior of a sick man, it was the behavior of a sane predator who understood exactly how to exploit the system. After weeks of hearing that Jeffrey Dahmer was a victim of his own biology, the prosecution called their star witness, Dr. Park Dietz. If the trial was a battle for Dahmer's soul, Dietz was the man who brought the scalpel. He didn't just study Dahmer, he dissected his choices. Watch for the moment Dietz shifts the conversation from illness to intent. He is about to expose the fatal flaw in the defense's entire narrative.
Dr. Dietz, when were you first contacted in this case?
Sometime in December 1991.
And what was the nature of that contact?
The first contact was a telephone call from you, Mr. McCann.
And did you actually agree to conduct an evaluation on behalf of the Milwaukee County District Attorney's Office of the defendant in this case?
Yes, I did.
Were there any ground rules agreed upon for your evaluation?
Yes, there were.
And would you share those with the jury?
Well, in the initial discussions that we had, Mr. McCann asked me if I would be available and willing to evaluate Mr. Dahmer. And I told him that I would enjoy the opportunity to evaluate Mr. Dahmer, but there were certain conditions that we would have to agree on before I could do that. One of those conditions was that I'd have free access to any information that the government had acquired, and Mr. McCann volunteered to make everything available to me that the government had learned in the course of its investigation of Mr. Dahmer. A second condition was that I be free to testify for either side, that if at the conclusion of my evaluation my findings were such that the defense thought I would be a favorable witness, that I would be free to testify for them if they asked me to, and that if my findings were such that Mr. McCann thought that he would like to call me as a witness, that I'd be free to do that too. And finally, we discussed payment and agreed on a budget, because Mr. McCann told me that the county funds were limited and that we would have to agree on how much could be spent on this, and we did agree.
And what did you subsequently do to conduct that evaluation of the defendant?
The first thing I did was to obtain various documents and to review those documents. The documents didn't arrive all at once. They continued to come by the carton, but they included eventually what I believe to be all of the police reports that concern Jeffrey Dahmer, all of the police reports that were interviews with witnesses who had actually observed Mr. Dahmer or spoken to him at any time in his life, all the police reports that were from people who might have actually known something about Jeffrey Dahmer, though at the time they were sent to me, it wasn't always clear if they were talking about the correct person or not. All of those investigative reports that had to do with the investigations at the scenes of various crimes, all of those photographs that were taken by Mr. Dahmer and recovered during the investigation, and all of those photographs taken by police in the course of their investigation, all of the documents that professionals or administrators had prepared about Mr. Dahmer over the years, such as his military records, his school records, his medical records, counseling records of various kinds, the correctional records about him, the court records about him. The testing that had been done since his arrest and the results of that, the reports of all of the people who had examined him since his arrest, the notes of at least Dr. Fosdal and Dr. Becker and Dr. Berlin, the notes of those who had attempted to treat him in the past, such as Dr. Rosen and Dr. Crowley. Offhand, those are the documents that come to mind. I may be omitting some.
And did there come a time that you met with the defendant?
This is the turning point. Dietz introduces a concept that changed the trial: selective control. He points out a devastating fact. Dahmer never had a compulsion when he was at work. He never had a compulsion when his grandmother was watching. He only lost control when it was safe and convenient. Now watch as Dietz explains why this proves Dahmer wasn't just sane, he was a master of his own dark desires.
Anything that could help me understand his mental state at the time of the crimes was germane to what it was I wished to do. But generally, when a forensic psychiatrist seeks to evaluate whether a defendant appreciated the wrongfulness of his conduct at the time of the crime, the questions that have to be addressed are, first, whether the defendant had any mental condition that could possibly have interfered with his ability to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct. Some mental disorders can affect a defendant's ability to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct. Some can't possibly do it, and some can only do it under particular circumstances. And so one has to look for what mental disorders there are and see if he has any of the kind that might impair his appreciation of wrongfulness at the time of a crime. Secondly, one has to look for each crime at whether the behavior of the defendant at the time indicates an awareness, an appreciation in particular, of the wrongfulness of his conduct. And thirdly, or lastly rather, one has to look at what the defendant says his awareness was or his thoughts were at the time. But behavior during a crime always speaks more loudly than defendant's statements after a crime. First, I began to ask him one by one, at the time that he killed James Dockstader, for example, did he appreciate that what he was doing was wrong? And Mr. Dahmer said, yes, he did. And I asked him that for another victim, and he said, yes, he did, and another, and yes, he did. And he then said that the answer would be the same for all of them, that at the time of the crime, he appreciated the wrongfulness of what he was doing. But this is a statement made by Mr. Dahmer in January '92. There have been events in between, and I never rely solely on what a defendant says if I have the opportunity to look beyond that. And so that wasn't the end of my assessment. I also looked at what other evidence there was. A second example was that Mr. Dahmer, in at least some of the instances, took steps to reduce the chances that he would be the last individual seen with a victim. So, for example, there are instances in which he sought a particular person who was alone rather than with someone else. There are multiple reasons for doing that. One of them is to be able to isolate someone alone. And of course, he always took his victims someplace where he was alone with them. And he took steps in some instances to ensure that whoever drove him there, such as a taxi driver or friends of the victim, didn't see exactly where he and the victim were going, but rather would be dropped off a few blocks away so that they wouldn't be able to identify the particular address. That's an indication that at those times that he did those things, he knew that what he was going to do was wrong and that he wanted to avoid detection for what he already planned to do. Another kind of example is that he in fact always committed the charged crimes, namely the homicides, while alone with victims. None of the charged homicides was done in the presence of any other witness. None was done in public view. None was done in a way that others would be able to see him. And by taking them to a private place and by, in fact, seeking privacy with him, he's showing an awareness that it's wrong to do these things with people where you will be observed. Yet another kind of example is Mr. Dahmer's statements on a number of occasions, including statements to me more than once, that he drank to overcome inhibitions about killing the victims. He would drink at several intervals during the course of time with the victim, but here I'm addressing the aspect that because he was inhibited against killing them and found that aspect of his behavior distasteful, he would purposely drink more in order to overcome his inhibition against doing a part of this that he didn't like, didn't seek out, and in fact felt uncomfortable about. His discomfort with the killing is an indication that he knew that killing was wrong.
Okay, we may proceed.
Yet another example is that Mr. Dahmer reported, and his behavior showed, that at various times when he was drugging a victim or staying with a drugged victim or in fact killing a victim or being with an already dead victim or dismembering a victim or disposing of evidence of a killing, he would at all those various times be aware and take steps to prevent being observed by other parties who might report him to the police. That's because he knew at each of those stages that what he was doing was wrong, and that if he were detected doing those things, he would be in trouble for it. And so he went to some lengths to try to prevent other people from seeing him do any of those things, including the killings, which is the aspect with which he's charged.
Dr. Park Dietz's testimony was the viral moment of the 90s long before the internet existed. By highlighting that Dahmer exercises selective control, he effectively destroyed the insanity defense. Dahmer didn't have a broken brain. He had a dark preference that he chose to indulge only when the risk of capture was zero. He wasn't a man being driven by a monster. He was the man who decided when to let the monster out to play. In forensic terms, if you can choose not to commit a crime because a witness is present, you are legally sane. Period. After weeks of clinical testimony and gruesome evidence, Jeffrey Dahmer was given one final opportunity to speak. But even now, facing the families of his victims, he couldn't stop performing. He didn't just want forgiveness. He wanted the world to accept his illness narrative one last time. Watch closely as he reads from his prepared statement. This isn't a man speaking from the heart. It's a man reading a script designed to frame him as a victim of his own mind.
The doctors have told me about my sickness, and now I have some peace. I know how much harm I have caused. I tried to do the best I could after the arrest to make amends, but no matter what I did, I could not undo the terrible harm I have caused. My attempt to help identify the remains was the best that I could do, and that was hardly anything. I feel so bad for what I did to those poor families, and I understand their rightful hate. I know I will be in prison for the rest of my life. I know that I will have to turn to God to help me get through each day. I should have stayed with God. I tried and failed and created a holocaust. Thank God there will be no more harm that I can do. I believe that only the Lord Jesus Christ can save me from my sins. I have instructed Mr. Boyle to end this matter. I do not want to contest the civil case. I've told Mr. Boyle to try and finalize them if he can. If there is ever any money, I want it to go to the victims' families. I've talked to Mr. Boyle about other things that might help ease my conscience in some way of coming up with ideas on how to make some amends to these families, and I will work with him on that. I want to return to Ohio and quickly end that matter so that I can put all of this behind me and then come right back here to do my sentence. I decided to go through this trial for a number of reasons. One of the reasons was to let the world know that these were not hate crimes. I wanted the world in Milwaukee, which I deeply hurt, to know the truth of what I did. I didn't want unanswered questions. All the questions have now been answered. I wanted to find out just what it was that caused me to be so bad and evil. But most of all, Mr. Boyle and I decided that maybe there was a way for us to tell the world that if there are people out there with these disorders, maybe they can get some help before they end up being hurt or hurting someone. I think the trial did that. I take all the blame for what I did. I hurt many people. The judge in my earlier case tried to help me, and I refused his help, and he got hurt by what I did. I hurt those policemen in the Conorak matter, and I shall ever regret causing them to lose their jobs, and I hope and pray that they can get their jobs back because I know they did their best, and I just plain fooled them. For that I am so sorry. I know I hurt my probation officer, who was really trying to help me. I am so sorry for that, and sorry for everyone else that I have hurt. I have hurt my mother and father and stepmother. I love them all so very much. I hope that they will find the same peace I am looking for. Mr. Boyle's associates, Wendy and Ellen, have been wonderful to me, helping me through this worst of all times.
Did you hear the language? He speaks of the horror of what I have done, but he uses the passive voice. He frames the murders as something that happened to him, rather than choices he made. It's a subtle but powerful form of distancing. He calls it a vicious disease because a disease doesn't have a soul. A disease doesn't go to prison. But the jury had heard enough. Now watch the moment the sick man's persona finally meets the wall of reality.
Jurors, I am now going to read your verdicts to you, after which I will make inquiry of you as to whether or not, indeed, I have accurately read the verdicts to you. In the state of Wisconsin versus Jeffrey Dahmer, case number F912542, a special verdict. Question 1. At the time the crime was committed in count 1 of the information in regard to the death of James E. Dockstader, did the defendant, Jeffrey L. Dahmer, have a mental disease? Answer, no. There are 2 dissenting jurors. State of Wisconsin versus Jeffrey L. Dahmer, case number F912542. Question number 1. At the time the crime was committed in count 5 of the information in regard to the death of Edward W. Smith, did the defendant, Jeffrey L. Dahmer, have a mental disease? Answer, no. Question number 2 need not be answered. Dissenting jurors.
The jury saw through the linguistics. They declared him sane. They declared him responsible. Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't a sick man who needed a doctor. He was a guilty man who deserved a cell. His final experiment, the attempt to manipulate the legal system into seeing him as a victim, failed. For the first time in his life, Jeffrey Dahmer found a reality he couldn't control. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms, a debt he could never pay, in a world that would never forget his choices. The mask had fallen, and for once, the monster had nowhere left to hide.